attention. Physically draw your attention, which you might have to move your chairs or turn your chairs so that you're facing this way. And also mentally draw your attention to our community conversation guest speaker who is with us. And so I am delighted to be given the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker. This is the first time that I have met Mr. Hamm, and your reputation precedes you.
Okay.
Man. And so I just want to read a little. He's got a bio that's about 4 days long. But I'm only going to read a piece of it, okay? And so I'm going to read some of it, but so that you would get just a brief introduction of who this man is, and then he's going to come to us in his own way and share with us a little bit about what God has placed on his heart. And then we're going to have a question and answer, a time you can ask questions. So while he's speaking, if anything comes to your mind or your heart, jot it down. Right. Jot it down on a piece of paper. And so when he's done, when we come time for Q&A, you'll have your question already ready. So let me introduce to some and present to others Mr. Lawrence Hamm. Lawrence Hamm has been a Lawrence Hamm has been a relentless advocate for African Americans and the cause of human rights and civil rights for all oppressed people for more than 48 years. Raised in Newark, New Jersey. All right. He attended public schools and emerged at the age of 17 as a forceful and articulate spokesperson for the educational needs and aspirations of the Newark students and the community. He was appointed to the Newark Board of Education, making him at the time the youngest voting school board member in the United States of America. Wow. Mr. Hamm received his master's degree and graduated cum laude from Princeton University in 1978. While at Princeton University, Mr. Hamm was an organizer of campus anti-apartheid movement. He organized daily student protests and sit-ins of more than 200 students, calling attention to Princeton's financial investment in the apartheid South Africa. These protests and the rising tide of public indignation resulted in Princeton University's divestment in the apartheid African American economy. His impact as a student activist at Princeton is chronicled in a documentary film called Blacks at Princeton. He was given the honor of addressing the United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid. And upon graduation, he received various honors at Princeton for his activism and humanitarian efforts. By the way, he did get a degree while he was there, right? He also has a master's degree in business administration. So while he was riding around causing a lot of problems and stirring up trouble and being an activist, he was also getting his master's degree in business administration. I'm going to fast forward to the end, and he'll fill in the blanks. Over the many years, Mr. Hamm has received many leadership and service awards. More recently, in 2015, Mr. Hamm received the key to the city of Newark from Mayor Ross J. Baraka. In 2016, he was a National Education Association Human and Civil Rights Award winner, receiving the organization's Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Award. In 2017, he was placed on the 2017 Insider NJ 100 Powerful List of Influential People in New Jersey. In 2018, he was also included in the Insider list of African American political power list in honor of Black History Month. In 2018, he was the recipient of the Congress of the Donald M. Payne Jr. Black History Month Award. And in 2019, again, he was awarded the Insider 100 Power List Award. Mr. Hamm is deemed as a public speaker and has addressed audiences throughout the United States and other countries. He is the proud father of 3 daughters. Tell me your daughters' names. Lainey, Nia, and Imani, all of whom are college graduates. Amen. Amen. So Daddy put those 3 girls through college. Amen. That's an event right there. Amen. Would you please give a warm and wonderful Old First Church welcome to Mr. Larry Hamm as he comes to us now.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
Power to the people.
Power to the people.
I'm glad to be here today to join with you. I want to thank Jeanette for inviting me and everyone for receiving me today as we honor the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, before I say anything else, I want to give you a little bit of information that you can take with you when you leave here. Dr. King, of course, is known as one of the greatest orators that this country has ever produced. I don't think there's anybody in this room that hasn't heard the I Have a Dream speech and many other speeches that Dr. King has given, particularly if you listen to radio stations like WBAI Radio and WBLS that play his speeches from time to time. But it's important to also know that Dr. King was an author. He was a writer, and he wrote 6 books. How many people know all 6 books? How many people can name the 6 books that Dr. King wrote? So I'm going to give them to you. If you have something to write with, just jot them down, and then at your leisure, you can get them from the library, or you can go across the street to Source of Knowledge Bookstore, which is right across the street from here, and pick up a couple of them. I don't know if they have all 6, but I'm sure they have some. The first book that Dr. King wrote was titled A Measure of a Man. A Measure of a Man. It's a very small book, but it was Dr. King's autobiographical statement. In fact, Dr. King wrote the book before the Montgomery bus boycott, before he was a world famous person. So that's one book, the first book. The second book he wrote was Stride Toward Freedom. That's Dr. King's version, his story of the Montgomery bus boycott. How many people in here know about the Montgomery bus boycott? 60,000 black people in Montgomery, Alabama boycotted the buses, wouldn't ride the buses for 381 days. You know, that's something, right? It's the longest, largest boycott in the history of the United States of America. But there are other versions of the Montgomery bus boycott. Fred Gray wrote one called A Bus to Freedom. Diane Nash, who was a part of the Women's Political Association, which actually did the organizing work behind the Montgomery bus boycott. In fact, they printed out the first, I think it was 10 or 20,000 leaflets to get people to come to the first meeting that they had at the church. And that was when, to make a copy of something, you had to have a mimeograph machine. How many people know what a mimeograph machine is? You remember mimeograph? You had to, in the old days, I'm not even talking about the new mimeograph. I'm talking about like the first mimeograph, when you had to burn the stencil. You know, you had to make a stencil, then you had to put the stencil, so you don't know nothing about that, do you? You had to put the stencil on the drum, you had to make sure it was placed just right, and then you had to turn that drum around for every kind. Imagine having to do that 10,000 times. That's what the Women's Political Association did. Martin Luther King talks about the Women's Political Association and Diane Nash in his story, but Diane, she got her own version of it. So there are various versions of the Montgomery bus boycott, but I really would urge you to read Stride Toward Freedom. The next book that Dr. King wrote was titled Strength to Love. Strength to Love. In this book, Dr. King outlines his theological philosophical and ideological roots of his philosophy of nonviolence.
Yes.
And that's a very important book, particularly for those of us who are Christians. Because you have to understand, Dr. King was an activist, but he was a Christian minister.
Yes.
He was a minister of the gospel,
Yes.
a disciple of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And he says this in his own words. But he also says what the teachings of Christ were that motivated him to do what he did, to put his life on the line. All of us know that Martin Luther King was assassinated, right? But do you know that there were multiple attempts to assassinate Dr. King? The one on April 4th, 68 was the last one. There were various attempts on Dr. King's life. The day after the Montgomery bus boycott, they blew up his house. The day after. He wasn't even famous yet. Just the fact that the people in the town were threatening to have a boycott, they learned that Martin King was the organizer of it. They blew his house up. And you can see pictures of the house after it was blown. It blew the whole front part of the house off. The first half of the house blew it off. And you can go in books and see this. And you know, Coretta and the children were in the house when they bombed the house. Coretta and the children there. I wonder how many married women in here. Raise your hand, married women. If your husband did something to get the house blown up, what would you do?
Oh no! Oh no!
That's why we can't talk about Dr. King and not talk about Coretta Scott King, because Dr. King couldn't have done what he did had it not been for the support and help of his wife, Coretta Scott King. You gotta understand that. That's very important to understand. Because under today's circumstances, that would have broke a marriage up. They'd be like, Negro, you crazy. You gonna get us and the kids killed. But Coretta was not like that. She was a freedom fighter. And she was as committed in her thinking, in her activism as he was. But we know more about him because he was the leader. But you should read Coretta Scott King's autobiography also. So that's Strength to Love. So that's 3 books. Measure of a Man, Stride Toward Freedom, Strength to Love. The next book is Why We Can't Wait. Why We Can't Wait. How many people in here heard of the letter from a Birmingham jail? Everybody. See, most people heard of that letter. That's a letter that Dr. King wrote to the ministers of Birmingham. Yeah. Not just the white ministers, but to the white and the black ministers. Because what happened when Dr. King was getting ready to begin his campaign in Birmingham, because remember, he started in Montgomery, the ministers took out a full-page ad in the newspaper and said, Dr. King, thanks, but no thanks, we can handle our own Negro problem. Think about that. You know, during the Montgomery bus boycott, there was a group of ministers, of preachers, that had gotten together on their own and tried to call the boycott off before victory had been achieved. Yes. See, that's why it's important to study history. Because if you don't study history, you'll only get a piece of the story. And sometimes the piece that you don't have is the most important part. It's important to understand what our people, including Dr. King was the leader, but there were thousands of people in the civil rights movement. Yeah. People whose names you don't even know. And many of us in here today, we got all kind of degrees. We got bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and PhDs and postdoctorates. We wouldn't have been able to go to those colleges had it been for people whose names we don't even know, who were the foot soldiers of Martin Luther King. See, you think you did all this on your own.
You got these degrees and your house and this big job and all these other things. I'm old enough, and I'm 66, and I'm probably not the oldest person in here. I am old enough to remember segregation. And I'm not talking about segregation in Montgomery or segregation in Birmingham. I'm talking about segregation in Newark, New Jersey. I'm talking about movie theaters, 1 block from here. The Adams, the Branford, on Market Street, the RKO Proctors, the Paramount, on Broad Street, the Loeys. I can remember in the 50s when we couldn't even sit in the mezzanine. That's the main section downstairs, right? Black people had to sit up in the balcony in Newark, New Jersey. See, you think all this stuff went on down south. I'm telling you, it went on right here. We learn about slavery. We think about Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, Florida, and Mississippi. Slavery was here in New Jersey, brothers and sisters. Black people were enslaved in New Jersey. New Jersey was a colony founded in 1620. By 1625, African enslaved people were here building roads, building dams, clearing forests, laying the basis for cities and civilization. So we've been here as long as anybody else except the indigenous people, the Native Americans that were here. That's why Wheat Wake High School has an Indian as their mascot. Because this that we're standing on right here, this was the land of the Lenni Lenape, Indian people. I don't know if they still have it, but down there in the Robert Treat Hotel, they had this big mural on the wall where you see these Dutch settlers giving beads to the Indians. And you think that that's how they got the land. They got the land because they took the land. They took it by force and they took it by arms. And after the stolen land, they used stolen labor to work the land. So our people have been here from the beginning. New Jersey was the last colony, the last northern state to abolish slavery. Did you know that? And only abolished it by virtue of the passage of the 13th Amendment by Congress. When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, September of 1862, becoming effective January 1st, 1863, the state legislature of New Jersey nullified Lincoln's power to emancipate slaves in this state. New Jersey, you needed a 27 state. There were 36 states at the end of the Civil War. 9 of them were part of the Confederacy. You needed 3/4 of the states to ratify the amendments to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which made us citizens, and the 15th Amendment, which gave black men the right to vote. That's right, black women didn't get it until all women got it in 1921. It took to the 20th century for women to get the right to vote in this country. So you needed 27 states to ratify an amendment to the Constitution. New Jersey was not in the 27 state majority, even though it was part of the Union and fought in the Civil War. It was not a part of the 27 state majority that ratified the 13th Amendment. Not only that, I visited a place. How many know? Anybody didn't know where Pennington, New Jersey is? Pennington. In Pennington, New Jersey, is something called the African Cemetery. Did you know this? How many people know this? African Cemetery. That's what it's called. It's called the African Cemetery. It's in Pennington. Pennington is a town that sits between Trenton and Princeton. And I advise you to go visit sometime the African Cemetery. Why is there a cemetery in Pennington called African Cemetery? Because in New Jersey, the black Civil War soldiers could not be buried in the same cemetery as the white Civil War soldiers. Now understand this, they fought in the same Union Army, but the black people and the white people could not be even buried buried together in the same cemetery. I went down there last Veterans Day because my father, is buried. My father and my grandfather are veterans. So when I finished visiting them, they in Glendale, in the veterans section in Glendale and Belleville, I jumped in the car and took a friend. We went down to Pennington. And I was looking at some of the headstones. And I saw headstones, all the headstones, most of the headstones in that cemetery were soldiers that had fought in the Civil War. They were all the so-called colored troops. At that time, they called them the colored troops. That's the official name, the colored troops. And on the headstone, it would show you the name of the person. It would say colored troops. It would tell you what they did. Like if they were infantry, cavalry, cannon master, whatever. What they did, what regiment they were in. And I noticed I saw a lot of soldiers that said their infantry, their regiment was Connecticut. Well, I said, well, why was the people in Connecticut buried in New Jersey? Because in New Jersey, black people couldn't join the Union Army. They had to go to Connecticut to join the Union Army. Think about that. That's how deep this thing is, because when we think of the Civil War, right, we think of the Union is the good guys and the Confederacy is the bad guys, but it's a little more complex than that. So anyway, I get away from the topic here. So measure of a man, strive toward freedom, strength to love, why we can't wait. Why we can't wait has a letter from a Birmingham jail. It also has in Why We Can't Wait, Dr. King's Bill of Rights for social and economic justice. And Dr. King began to talk about this as early as 1964. See, once the Civil Rights Act was passed, Martin Luther King turned his attention to economic rights. Because Dr. King said, what difference does it make if I can eat at a lunch counter if I can't afford to buy the hamburger? Dr. King said that. Yes, he did. So Why We Can't Wait. The fifth book is Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. That's the one I would really recommend that people start with. That brings you to where Dr. King's thinking was toward the end of his life. And it's also a handbook for organizing. And then the last book, the sixth book, is Trumpet of Conscience. Dr. King was the only black person ever invited to Canada to address the entire nation of Canada.
What was that?
Trumpet of Conscience. Trumpet of Conscience. Yes.
Dr. Hamm, what are the other four books?
Okay, I'm going to name them again. Measure of a Man.
Yes.
Strive toward freedom. Strength to love. Why We Can't Wait. That's 4. The 5th is Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. And the 6th is Trumpet of Conscience. You said you had your hand up.
Okay.
The fourth place.
The 4th?
The fourth book.
The 4th book is Why We Can't Wait. The 5th book is Where Do We Go From Here. And the 6th book is Trumpet of Conscience. And I'm going to recommend one other book. The book is not by Dr. King, but it has a collection of the writings of Dr. King, and that book I'm recommending to you is A Testament of Hope. And why do I add this book to the 6 books that Dr. King wrote? Well, first of all, everything in A Testament of Hope was written by Dr. King. But that book contains almost all of the written speeches and sermons, also articles that Dr. King wrote in the last year of his life, the last 12 months. You know, he gave his speech
opposing the war in Vietnam on April 4th, 1967. He gave that speech at the Riverside Church. He was assassinated exactly 1 year later, April 4th, 1968. And I don't even think it was an accident. I think they were sending a signal. And we must not forget that Dr. King was assassinated. He did not die a natural death. He did not die from disease. He didn't have a heart attack. He didn't die of starvation. He was assassinated. And he was assassinated because he took a stand against oppression and injustice. But not just because he took a stand, but because he took a stand and millions of other people were willing to follow him. And not just black people. In his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, Dr. King's last project was the Poor People's Campaign, 1968. And in the book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, Dr. King talks about the Poor People's Campaign and what they wanted to do. They were going to Washington. Dr. King says he wanted to have, and maybe this is where the Million Man March idea came from. Dr. King said he wanted to bring 1 million people to Washington, D.C. And this is what he said. He said, I want to bring the Negroes from the ghettos. That's the word, was current at the time. The Negroes from the ghettos. The Latinos from the barrios. The Native Americans from the reservations. And the poor white people from Appalachia. There are white people that are poor in America. In fact, I got a secret for you. The majority of poor people in America are white. Now, they put a black and a brown face on poverty, but the majority of people that are poor in America are white. And I've been through this country. And I ain't got to go all the way down south to show you some really poor white people. Anybody ever been through Pennsylvania? When you go through Pennsylvania and you get past Philadelphia, your eyes are going to be open. Everything you see poor black people doing, you're going to see poor white people doing out there. And especially when you get to the part of Pennsylvania where the Appalachian Mountains come through, there's some poor people there. We got some poor white people in New Jersey. There's some towns that are just like destitute. But see, they put a black face on poverty and make you think. But Dr. King was putting together a rainbow coalition. Black, white, Native American, Latino. And what were they going to Washington for? They were going to Washington to engage in massive, non-violent civil disobedience. See, this is what the McDonald's commercial won't tell you. See, y'all rely on McDonald's and Burger King to tell you about Martin Luther King. Everybody can't wait, right? For the sale day. King wanted to shut Washington, D.C. down. They were going to lay on the runways of the airport. They were going to lay in the streets. They were going to shut Washington down until Congress passed an economic bill of rights. All this is documented. You don't have to take anything I say. You could Google right now. If you Google Poor People's Campaign, it'll all come up on the internet articles on what they were trying to do in '68. But it's in his book. In '66, he begins to sketch out the idea of what they wanted to do. And what was in this Economic Bill of Rights? Economic Bill of Rights, jobs at a living wage. Not jobs at a minimum wage, a living wage. You know what the minimum wage is now? The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. The state minimum wage is $8.35 an hour. I dare say, find me a place where you could pay rent on $7.25 an hour in Newark, New Jersey, or in Essex County. You can't do it. You can't do it. Dr. King said we should have a living wage. He didn't even say raise the minimum wage.
He said a living wage. Do you know what a living wage would be in Essex County right now? A living wage would be about $33 an hour. Dr. King was saying that's where all the wages should start. Start there. Because if you work 40 hours a week, you should make enough money to support you and your family.
That's right.
That's what King was saying. See, we here in the 21st century, a half a century after Dr. King's assassination, and we trying really to catch up to where we were in 1968. We were more advanced in our thinking in 68 than we are now. You know what else Dr. King called for? A guaranteed minimum income. Where did you hear that at? In the presidential debates of this year. People talking about a guaranteed income, but Dr. King wasn't talking about $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month is like $7.25 an hour. I mean, I would take it. I ain't gonna say I ain't gonna take it, but that ain't gonna solve the problem. No, Dr. King said everything. Dr. King wanted to abolish poverty. He said this country was too rich to have poor people. When he got to Oslo, Norway, at the age of 35, become the youngest person ever to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Let me tell you something. The first speech I ever heard by Martin Luther King was not the I Have a Dream speech. Let me tell you the first time I heard a speech with Dr. King. I was about 11 years old. When my father passed away at 4, my mother took me and we went to live with her parents, my grandparents. And in that second floor apartment was my mother, my grandfather, my grandmother, my cousin Ralph from down south, and my Aunt Joan, who was my grandmother's sister. My Aunt Joan was a live-in domestic. Y'all know what a live-in domestic is? That's like a maid that lives with the family and comes home on the weekends. My Aunt Joan was a live-in domestic, and she worked for some rich white people called the Purse family. And I guess they knew, maybe she said something about me, so Joan would come home every weekend with something. She said the Purse family wanted to give you these things. So sometimes it was clothes, sometimes it was something else, sometimes it was records. Like I was probably the only black person on 12th Street in Newark that had Joan Baez's records. When everybody else had Temptations and Full Tops. You know, my Aunt Joan was bringing Joan Baez. You know, and classical music. You know, all kind of records, even jazz. Like the white people was listening to Miles Davis. The first jazz record I heard was Round About Midnight. Miles Davis and my Aunt Joan had brought this record, you know, from these people. They brought another record. And this record was on the cover was Martin Luther King. So the white people was listening to Dr. King too. And the title of the record was In the Struggle for Freedom and Human Dignity. And it was a recording of a speech that Dr. King gave at the New York Armory in 1964 after he returned from Oslo, Norway, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I was about, 11 in the 5th or 6th grade when I heard this speech. Dr. King was still alive. I didn't know nothing about Martin Luther King. You know, I didn't come from a political family. I don't even know if my family was members of the NAACP. I don't think they were, because I don't remember my mother ever saying, all right, I'm going to the NAACP people. My mother didn't go to anything after she came home from work. And I grew up on all black community. They didn't talk, if they talked about race, they didn't talk about it around me. So I hated what I know. I
I didn't know nothing about Dr. King, but one day I went in my room, and in those days, you know, today people got they got phone, like they used to have iPod, right? But people don't even have iPod now. They listen to the music right on the phone, right? You know, but back then, we had like little portable record players that you could unfold and speak, like you fold it up like a briefcase, and then you open it up, you know, and the tape will come down and the speakers come out. Remember that? I have one made by the Griffith Company, and I put this record on. And I swear, I shouldn't swear in the church. I keep forgetting I'm in church. But I had never heard talk like that before. I had never heard, I've been to church, but I had never heard, even the person that Dr. King, that introduced Dr. King. You know who introduced him on the record? A. Philip Randolph. Yes, I had never heard A. Philip Randolph speak. And even he was like, what kind of black people are these who talk like this? I mean, the highest, the most eloquent oratory. And I heard Dr. King speak on this record. Now I'd never heard a black man do poetry before listening to this record. To this day, I can remember the poetry that Dr. King said. I think he quoted a poem from Langston Hughes. Fleecy locks and black complexions cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwell in black and white the same. If I were so tall as to reach the stars or to grasp the ocean into span, I must be measured by my soul. The mind is the standard of the man. I heard that as a little boy, you know, and I'm 66 now. I can remember like it was yesterday. But I also remember this that Martin Luther King said. At that time in the 60s, there was a famine in Russia or somewhere, and there was a debate about whether or not the United States should sell corn to Russia. And people were saying, well, we got a surplus. What should we do with the surplus corn that we have this year? And Dr. King said, I know what we can do. We can store it in the stomachs of the children that go to bed hungry at night in the United States of America. I came from a poor family, but I really didn't know I was poor at the time because I had all I could eat. I got a new suit for Easter every year. I got school clothes. I didn't know I was poor until somebody told me. But I didn't know that there were people that were literally starving in our country. And I learned that through this record. That was the first speech, and I heard that in like 65, before Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. So I recommend A Testament of Hope because that book has the speeches and the articles that Dr. King gave in the last years of his life. My life has been crisscrossed by Martin Luther King. I didn't learn anything about Dr. King in school. And I don't think the kids are learning much about him today. Now I'm going to tell you something. We got a Dr. King holiday. All the schools are closed. We got a Martin Luther King monument down there in Washington, D.C. If they're going to close the schools, have a national holiday, build a monument, then the books of Martin Luther King need to be required reading in the schools of our nation. And I dare somebody, I'm going to challenge somebody in this room right now. Tell me a school that requires one of Dr. King's books to be read. That's crazy. That's what they say in psychological terms, incongruent. It don't make no sense. It's incongruent. How are you going to have a national holiday
schools. Look, when I was a kid, when we were in school, we had elocution. You had to stand up and recite the preamble to the Constitution from memory. You had to stand up and at least attempt to deliver the Gettysburg Address. I mean, I could see a situation where how come each church can't have an elocution contest and give a scholarship to the young person that can stand up and recite the I Have a Dream speech from memory? What if every church did that? I'm not even saying go out to society. I'm talking about with the children in your own church.
Amen.
See, we can't wait for the government to do everything. We got to do for ourselves. We got to have, we can't just say go to the library. We need to have our own little library in our own house. And Dr. King's books need to be on that library shelf in our own house. You ain't got to have your whole wall covered with books. But get you a little bookcase. $35, $40. Get your little bookcase and put some books on it. And sit down and read. And let your children see you reading. Because you can't tell the children read, they never see you reading. Because children go by what we do, not by what we say. My mother was a seamstress. My mother graduated high school and that was it. She went to Southside High School. My mother, Grace Hamm, had a book in her hand almost every day of her life. My mother read voraciously. She read everything. And her favorite at the end of her life was Stephen King. Yes. I'm not going to sit up here and say it was Martin Luther King, it was Stephen King. But it's true. I come in the house and my mother be sitting in her chair reading. She loved to read. And I saw my mother, by seeing my mother read, it showed me that reading was something to do. Not watch television all the time. You know, reading is something to do. But this is important. So I challenge the people in this room to go to the schools in your community and ask the principal, do you require anything that Dr. King wrote? You know, in elementary school, I understand there's a difference, but look, okay, you can't do a whole speech, do a whole book, do a speech. In fact, even in here, I would encourage, when we have these King celebrations, let's do something a little different sometime. Instead of having a speaker come in or having the choir sing, get one of Dr. King's speeches. Like there's a speech, the book is a testament of hope, but there's a speech in that book by the same title. Get that speech, make copies, give it to everybody, and then come back like you in this room now and have a discussion about what you read. See, that's called edification. Yes, I Have a Dream speeches here. That's good. That's a place to start. But this is important that we edify ourselves, that we educate ourselves, brothers and sisters, on what Dr. King was. The next time I kind of came into contact with the King family, I was appointed to the Board of Education. They told you that was 100 years ago. But I was 17 years old. I wasn't even old enough to vote when I was appointed to the Board of Education. And I was a real board member. I wasn't like the student representative. There were 9 board members. I was like 7 of 9, like in Star Trek, right? That character 7, I was one of the 9. And the summer that I was appointed to the board, I received a letter from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And they were going to give me their Youth Leadership Award. And they flew me down to New Orleans for the national conference. And that night, not in the hotel, but on a baseball field, at a rally in the community of New Orleans, I received the award from the hands of Coretta Scott King, the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King. That was in August of 1971. And that, during the few days I was there for that conference, I met all of them that were still alive. I met Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young, Hosea Williams, Jesse Jackson, and then one day, like the next day, we were at like a little reception, and there's a lot of people, like in this room, there's a lot of people walking, talking, eating, and somebody came over to me and said, come over here, Brother Hamm, we want to introduce you to someone. And there was a lady sitting over there in the corner, and they said, Mr. Hamm, I'd like to introduce you to Rosa Parks. I met Rosa Parks. And after meeting Rosa Parks, I came back to Newark. And as a board member, at the next board meeting, I made a motion. I said, I move that we change the name of Waverly Avenue School to Rosa L. Parks Elementary School. And we changed the name. And we changed the name of South 8th Street School to Martin Luther King School. And we changed the name of South 10th Street School to Harriet Tubman School, and so on and so forth. But we have a history of a connection. We have that connection. The church where my organization meets at, Abyssinian Baptist Church, Dr. King was in there about a week before he was killed. He was in Abyssinian on March 27, 1968. But he visited many churches in New Jersey. Maybe he was even here too. You know, we have these connections, and we must keep these connections. And now we find ourselves in the 21st century. And when I was coming down here, I was listening to the news. And on the news, they say the governor of Virginia has declared a state of emergency. Did y'all hear this?
Yeah, yes.
The governor of Virginia has declared a state of emergency. Do you know why he's declared a state of emergency? Because the Klan is going to come there to have a gun rally. The Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the white nationalists. They come in there, and they say they come in armed. Now they're coming because the governor's passed a law, said y'all can't be walking around here with no guns, not on the state capitol. So they're up in arms. And the president of the United States, Trump, is egging them on to march on with their guns, to march on Richmond, the state capital of Virginia. See, you don't know about these white supremacist groups. Do you know what they're up to? They are trying to start a civil war in this country.
Yes.
That is their express mission. This is not secret knowledge, brothers and sisters. You can go right on your phone and Google Civil War, and right now, Civil War in America, you know, white nationalist groups, and it'll all come up. They want a race war. They want a violent race war. They want this country to be like apartheid South Africa. But I don't know about you. Our people and our allies gave too many lives, too much blood. I'm not going back, and I'm definitely not going back without a fight. I'm going to wind up with this, because I know we want to have some questions and answers, and that's always more interesting than somebody talking. But I'm going to wind up with this. Dr. King was a disciple of Jesus Christ.
Yes. Yeah.
And in Matthew 34 to 40, Jesus said, I leave you 2 commandments. That you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul. And that you love your neighbor as yourself. And in the book of John 13:34, Jesus says, I leave you a new commandment, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Dr. King gave his life because he was motivated by true feelings of love. Not love in the romantic sense, not erotic love, but agape, and in Greek, the love of humanity. And those brothers and sisters during the civil rights movement, they stepped out not by sight, but by what? Faith. By faith. They put their lives on the line. You know, Dr. King wasn't the only one that got killed. There were hundreds of civil rights workers that were either killed or beaten during the course of that 10-year period from 1955, the sit-in Montgomery, Rosa Parks, to 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Many people were killed. Many. Hundreds gave their lives so that we could have a better life. Jesus. So that we could what? Have a better life. So just as they sacrificed and fought, we have to sacrifice. The body of Christ. Now this is me talking now. So you can take whatever I say with a grain of salt. I'm not a theologian. I didn't go to seminary school. I'm just a street corner agitator. That's all I am. The street corner agitator. But I don't know about you, but it's time for the body of Christ to stand up. There are a lot of people walking around here, especially in the nation's capital, talking about they represent Christ. But what they represent is racism, white supremacy, and oppression. It's time for the true body of Christ to stand up. The Christ that embraces all mankind and humanity. The Christ that stands up with, you know where I learned to fight oppression? I learned from the Bible. I mean, when you tell the Moses story, that's the story of a people standing up against oppression. Standing against what seemed to be insurmountable odds. But stepping out on faith and in fact achieving liberation. But our story, the story of the oppressed peoples and the enslaved here in this country, is a story just like that. And it's time for us to speak out and speak truth to power. All of those people in the Bible that are called prophets, they spoke truth to power. John the Baptist, he didn't have a Cadillac. He didn't have a chariot. I guess that would be the Cadillac of his time, right? If he had a chariot. He didn't have beautiful purple robes. John the Baptist had on goat skin, and he ate locusts and honey. Locusts is grasshoppers. And honey. How many women in here would marry a man that wore goat skin and ate locusts and honey? John stood under the balcony of the temple and told Herod that he was wrong for marrying his brother's wife. Nathan the prophet was not in the palace. Nathan was out with the people. David was the most powerful king of Israel. He went to David and said, David, if a man had only one ewe lamb and someone stole it, what would you do to the person that stole that one ewe lamb? He said, I'd punish him. Nathan said, you said it with your own mouth. You're that man. Elijah the Tishbite. Two kings conferred to make war. One of the kings said, call Elijah so that he can prophesy about this war. The other king said, don't call Elijah. He never have nothing good to say. a prophet. That's what prophets do. They speak truth to power. They speak for the poor and the oppressed who are not heard. This is what Jesus did. Jesus didn't hobnob. He wasn't in the wine caves with billionaires. Jesus was in the highways and the byways. In fact, he was criticized by the Pharisees for being with the prostitutes and the tax collectors. Am I saying something wrong? I'm not a learned person. Somebody help me out with this.
Bastard.
He was with the prostitutes and the tax collectors. The tax collector was one of the most wicked people at that time. The people hated the tax collector. That's right. Jesus didn't say, blessed are the rich. He said, blessed are the poor. Jesus didn't say, blessed are the powerful. He said, blessed are the meek. Jesus said it would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it would be for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said to the rich young ruler, said, Master, what can I do to follow you? He said, sell off.
Sell off.
I need to sit down because I'm out of my element. I'm out of my element. I'm not supposed to be talking this talk. But see, that's what happens when you teach people to read. They read the Bible on their own. Do you know there was a time when everybody couldn't read? Amen. When there would be one Bible in the town, and the Word of God was whatever the person that was doing the reading said the Word of God was. This is true. Education has had a major impact on religion. So people can read the Bible for themselves. So brothers and sisters, I think it's time for the body of Christ to stand up, to speak out. A major part of the civil rights movement was the religious people, was the churches and the mosques and the synagogues and all the people. You know, they played a major role in the civil rights movement. It's time for us to come back to that. You know, and I'm gonna sit down with this. I got a cold the other day, and I got a cold because I was out late at night helping somebody move in the middle of the night. You know why they had to move? Because they were being evicted. And they had to get their stuff out right away because the sheriff was coming the next day. They had to get their stuff out of the apartment, get as much as they can, and it was one single woman and her daughter with no help. No help. When I tell you no help, no help. Not from family, not from anybody. She heard about our organization. Now I went to help. You ever seen an eviction? Has anybody in here seen people be evicted? Let me tell you something. Have you ever seen an eviction on television? You know why you don't see evictions on television? Because if they showed an eviction on television, it'd be a national uproar overnight. Because when an eviction comes, the sheriff comes. The sheriff and his men come. The county sheriff. And the county sheriff brings a moving company. And the sheriff and the men, if you're still in that house, they take you out. You can kick, you can scream, you can holler, they drag you out. And then the moving company comes in. They take your couch and your bed, your chairs and your tables, your dresser and your vanity and your belongings, and they sit it on the sidewalk. And then they come back. If it's an apartment, they padlock the door. If it's a house, they nail it shut. And they have big plywood, and they nail the plywood onto the window so you and nobody else can go back and get whatever was left in there. It's something to see. It'll break your heart, especially when it's a 75-year-old woman being put in the street, not because she didn't pay her mortgage, but because her mortgage company had been taken over by another mortgage company and she didn't know where to send the mortgage. This is what's happening every day in Essex County, which has the highest level of foreclosure and evictions in the state. But you don't hear about it because news media don't cover evictions. But I tell you, this country is rich enough to provide everybody with decent housing. Nobody should be in the streets in America.
That's right, that's right.
Nobody should be in the streets. But it's not going to happen until we stand up and say we want a better society.
Yes, we have love.
That's right. Motivated by love, not by hate, but with courage.
Amen.
And stand up and speak truth to power. Thank you very much.